All right, basic design. This is not designed to give you a full and complete understanding of every in and out and nuance of landscape design. It's designed to get you thinking about how one thinks about coordinating and combining plants with the other elements and features of your landscape. It follows the same principles as any other art form. So you have elements, line, form, texture, and color. We have concept, scale, rhythm, repetition, variety, and balance. And then unlike other landscapes or other art forms, we have to think about the plant attributes. Is it sun? Is it shade? How fast does it grow? What diseases does it get? What other elements does it have, such as fall color or flower color? Those are all sorts of things that other artists don't have to think about. We're going to separate these here because it's convenient to talk about them while they're separated. But the reality is it's very difficult to separate line from form, color, and texture. They're all parts of all the things that we go in that are in our landscape. Okay, so line. Line, basically, you can think of that almost as the outline of your shape. It can be linear, like a sidewalk. It can be arching, like perhaps branches of a grass. It can be a silhouette of a group of plants. This serves to provide direction and movement to the eye. You can establish perspective. You can create the feeling of distance or a feeling of closeness within your landscape. It should flow smoothly. And one of the ways to tell if your bed lines in particular are smooth or not is to get out the mower that's used for that property and go around the lines of the beds with the mower. If you're constantly having to back in and out, your lines are not smooth. So take a look at this picture and think about where the lines are. We see some straight lines here, but we also see curvy lines here. We see some curvy lines back here. But what's the general concept that you get? Do you feel that this is more formal or more informal? And what about this one? Here we have a lot of straight lines here on the building, here on the fence. Does it make you feel more formal or informal because of those straight lines? Or does the almost random placement of the plants make it seem more informal? Here we're establishing perspective, so we're forcing you to look down the center of this particular landscape to that thing at the end, which happens to be a little fountain thing down at the end of there. Here we're using line to block a view. So if you notice where that container is, it stops your view. Yeah, of course you can see past that, but you don't necessarily want to look past that because right now there's nothing to look at. Here the line is all going around this curve and leading to this kind of kidney-shaped bed. Did they give you something cool to look at? You know, that's kind of up to your opinion. But we've got other lines in the background. So if you're standing up top, lines here are going to drive your view down. But if you're down below, your lines are going to drive your view up. So we're utilizing lines to drive and generate views. Form is the three-dimensional aspect of things. It has mass, it has volume. It's not just the silhouette of things. So sometimes we look at plants and we say they have an open form. Others we say we have a solid form. Sometimes people use the word closed. It's easiest to think about this as the three-dimensional aspects of the stuff in your garden. So take a look at this plant. Can you see through it? We might say that has a solid form compared to this plant. Now the cool thing with plants is sometimes they change. So if you look at where the flower parts are with this yellow flower, that part seems to be a little bit more open where you can kind of see through it. Whereas at the base of the plant where the leaves are, it definitely appears to be more solid or closed. We can utilize forms to create views or to block views. So this is obviously not preventing you from walking through an area or seeing through it, but the brain thinks of it as a wall with windows and doors. So utilize those as a way to create an aspect, make people feel like they're in an enclosed area. Same thing here. What is the forms of these? How would this have changed if the designer had flipped those forms on their sides and created doorways through them and windows in them rather than having everything be open on the sides and closed at the top with a ceiling? Texture can be a couple of different things. It is, yes, the feeling of the surface of things. So the feeling of a leaf is something pubescent. Is it smooth? Is it waxy? Is it kind of cobblestone? But it's also lots and lots of little tiny leaves together might be something that has a fine texture versus big, bold, bodacious leaves will have a more coarse texture. Coarse textured plants tend to stand out, particularly from a distance. So if you look at freeway plantings, they often tend to be coarse textured plants. or lots and lots and lots of fine textured plants. The nice thing about fine textured plants is because you can see through them, kind of gives you the impact of distance when there really isn't any distance. So here, kind of a coarse textured plant, but if you look in the background, there's a very fine textured plant. Feel about this particular plant, this little armeria here in the center, might depend on your viewpoint. You might look at all the tiny little leaves and flowers and think, oh, very, very fine texture. Somebody else might look at those tiny little leaves and think, yeah, kind of fine texture, but I can't really see through it, so I'm going to say that's more of a coarse texture. Sometimes there's no right or wrong answer with design. It's just your personal preference. Combining different textures is another way to look at combining different plants. So here we have coarse texture with that stump. We have coarse texture with the purple coneflower. We have very fine texture with the Russian sage in the middle. The different textures here. So you've got textures with the flower spikes. You've got different forms with the flower spikes. You've got different texture with the leaves on those spiky flowers. And then you have all these tiny little fine textures at the base. Here we've got line driving a viewpoint. Yes, there are different textures there. There are different colors there. But the line is driving a viewpoint all the way to the background where we dramatically change the colors of the landscape from grays and blacks to browns. Then combining different textures, whether they're your hardscape textures or your softscapes textures, such as these plants here, is a really good way to arrest the eye and get people to stop and look. Color is going to be a separate topic. We're not really going to talk about that this semester. Okay. Design concepts. These are kind of a matter of personal taste. Do you like formal? Do you like informal? Art's very personal. So if you go to a museum, you can stand and look at a picture, and you might look at this picture and go, oh man, this thing speaks to my soul. And the person standing next to you thinks it's the most hideous, ugly thing that they've ever seen in their entire life. But even if you don't like a piece of art, you can understand why it's still hanging in a museum. So effective manipulation of these concepts definitely will help you create better, more artistic landscapes. All right, so let's talk about balance. Balance is a general equilibrium that makes up all parts of the composition. That's a really fancy way to say that you could have asymmetrical balance, you could have symmetrical balance. Symmetrical tends to be more formal, asymmetrical tends to be informal. Think of it like if you move into a new house and you have all your furniture and you want to put it in your living room, you don't just pile it all up against the wall. You don't just pile the couch and the table and the chair and the television all up against the same wall. No, you spread it out around the living room. Partly we do that is because of the functionality of the living room. Think of the landscapes as the same way. The landscape has to perform a function. And so we want to balance the elements and the features of our landscape throughout the landscape based on the function that they're going to perform. So here we have a very symmetrical, this is actually this, it doesn't look like it because of the way I'm standing when I took this picture, but if you were to stand right in the middle, it is exactly symmetrical, it is exactly the same on both sides, and it's very, very formal looking. What's repetition? What's repetition? What's repetition? We can repeat lots of different things, and repetition can come from your hardscapes, a sidewalk with the same lengths of concrete, a paver patio, a deck, a fence. All of those things can have repetition, obviously. You don't have a chain link fence and then a wooden fence and then a plastic fence and then a chain link fence. You make a chain link fence all the way around, and that's repetition. Or you have the wooden fence all the way around, and that's repetition. You can repeat the same plants throughout the garden. You can repeat the same colors, because chances are your conditions in the front and the back of the house are going to be different. So you repeat the same colors from the front to the back of the house. Here, it's obvious that we have repetition within the individual shapes of the plants. We have repetition of the same plants planted throughout, but we've changed it up a little bit to give it a little bit more interest by changing the order of those plants. You also have repetition within the gravel pathway. What's repeated here? The color red. You can repeat not just color within the plants, but within the other features of your landscapes as well. So here you have a little dragon dude who's also painted red. This is a really easy one. Most people don't plant one of the exact same thing throughout the entire landscape. So most homeowners are going to have different plants in their garden, and they're going to have different features of their landscape. Maybe they've got, like I said, a fence, a patio, a fire pit, a garage, a house. All of those things serve to add some variety. What's providing variety here? Well, the number of different plants, the number of different sizes. What's providing repetition? Well, we're seeing a lot of different pinks. So it serves to stop and add some liveliness and zest to the garden. Look at where you've got repetition. We could have repetition within the waterfall and the stairs. We've got repetition of different colors. Within that, we have big, bold, bodacious plants on either side of the doorway. But we've got a lot of variety in that there's really not a whole lot of repetition of individual actual plants. The repetition comes from their placement, comes from their color, or it comes from their types of leaves. Here we have repetition because we've got similar shapes, but you've got some variety because we're changing up the size and a little bit within the color. This one tends to be a little bit harder for people to understand because it's hard to think about rhythm and movement in a garden because the plants aren't really moving. So if the plants are not the thing that moves, what is it that moves? It's the people. We are the ones that move. And in a small garden, the movement could be very simple. You tilt your head down to look at the smaller plants. You move your head up to look at the larger plants in the background. The movement could be on a pathway that you have to walk through to get to the garden. But what provides the movement here? Notice the little plants are in the front and the big plants are in the back. That's the obvious way that we get movement and rhythm in our garden. But you'll see that this line curves around the back. If I want to see what's on the other side of that curve, I have to walk around there. That provides rhythm and movement. If you utilize repetition and variety and balance, you will often create rhythm just on your own. We've got repeated different colors. We've got one plant weaving its way all throughout here. We're repeating these espaliered trees on the fence. We're repeating this brick wall all throughout. We're repeating these colors. Even though the plants are different, we're repeating the colors. And then we have to have scale. I have a very small property. I don't have room in my front yard, which is about 12 by 15, for a plant that's going to be 15 feet tall and 20 feet across. I have to have much smaller plants for that. So you want things ideally to be visually in proportion to each other. This is a very large garden, so all of these plants either are very large themselves or they have multiple things in clumps. Now, if I'm going to be really picky about this, what I see is a lot of 2 to 3 foot mounds. All of the shapes are very, very similar. I would like to see more variety in the shapes, even though there's lots of variety in terms of the types of plants that are there. Do you like this? Why or why not? Now, whether or not you like it, does it have balance? Does it have repetition? Does it have variety? Is it in scale to everything else that's around it? Now, you might look at this and think, wow, that's kind of different. And it definitely is. It's kind of like a little mini bedroom in the middle of a great big lawn. What you don't see is that I am probably standing 200 feet away from this thing shooting this with a telephoto lens. So it looks like it's big, and it is big, but it's not in scale to the rest of the property. This is 5 acres of lawn, and this thing is way far away from in the middle of nowhere in this lawn. It makes no sense with its placement. Think of your gardens and your landscapes as a series of little vignettes, because we can't concentrate on 5 acres at a time. We can concentrate on only a small bit. So if you think of small bits and you make those really nice, then you can move your eye from one vignette to another throughout the landscape. As we go through this next series of pictures, I'm just going to stop for a couple of seconds and kind of remind you to think about what's good and what's bad in terms of are things in scale? Are they balanced? Are they utilizing line and form and texture well? Do you like the colors even? I know we didn't talk about color, but do you like the colors that you're seeing there? Do you think it looks busy? Some people might think this looks busy. Some people might go, oh man, I really like the combinations of the different plants and the different containers and the way they have the different colors against the colors of the pots against the ground and things like that. It doesn't matter where your plants are. This is out in California, and you can see they have a vastly different plant palette than we do, but they follow the exact same design concepts. So that driftwood that's in the center on the right-hand side, it has the same general habit as that cactus in the background on the left-hand side. Everything is part of your landscape. It's not just the plants, but the house is part of your landscape. These lawn chairs are part of this landscape. The gravel and the lawn, all of those things are parts of your landscape. So you want to make sure they all fit and all blend in together. Where do you see repetition? The point here is it doesn't matter what your particular garden looks like. Do you have a large garden? Do you have a small garden? Do you prefer formal? Do you prefer informal? Are you working with clients who like something that you don't, so you're struggling? You can look back at the different elements and concepts of design and utilize those to try to make combinations that are pleasing. As always, if you have any questions, do not hesitate to get in touch.